everyone, welcome back to Adhyana Tutorials and this is your tutor Arpita. In this video, ami cover korim company form of accounts or kisuman important topics and followed by some important questions junto tumaloke exam or agot ebar video to sai gole cover kori loba. Okay, let's start. Starting off with the definition of company. Moi tumalokor company definition to company characteristics or through diye bujai dim. Company is an artificial person that has a separate legal entity and has a common seat. It has perpetual successions and allows transferability of shares. It is managed by the board of directors and owned by shareholders. ठीक है sir? Now, तुमालोके features of the company केनेके मनत राखिबा মই तुमालोকক এটা easy mnemonic বনাই দিছো that is SCALP TM where SCALP or S stands for separate legal entity মানে company বেলেগ এটা entity হয় it is different from its shareholders ঠিক আছে next up we have C that is common seal A artificial person মানে company real person নহয় real person গুটেখিনি কাম কৰিব পাৰে but it is formed by law by birth form হোৱা নাই একাৰণে artificial person common seal to মানে company এটা signature থাকে সব stamps মাৰিব পাৰি papers ত হেতু common seal বুলি কয় এটো optional হয় it is not compulsory for every company to have a common seal next up we have L মানে limited liability company liability to company logote thake it does not extend to its shareholders mane company jikhini liability ase hetu jodi fulfill koribo nai para company shareholders or tate personal liability to share hoy mane transfer hoy na jay okay then we have perpetual succession then we have transferability of shares for T and M hol management scalp TM next company is owned by shareholders eta bostut confuse nohoba company manage kore board of directors but own kore shareholders paisa logar shareholders so hyote own kore but kaam khini kune sai diye board of directors sai diye company gute khini shares transferable hoy ami hebur share koribo paru shares mane ami ki buzu company junkhini capital invest kora hoy hetu horu parts ami bhangi diu hebur parts transferable ba shareable hoy juntuk ami shares boli kau okay now moving on to types of shares are duta type ase preference share and equity share preference share we have cumulative and non cumulative participating and non participating convertible non convertible redeemable and irredeemable preference shares moi bujai asu and for equity shares we have sweat equity yate mainly tumaloke preference share types khini sai jaba karon yar pora questions ahibo pare same goes for the features of company okay preference shares are cumulative and non cumulative mane ki cumulative mane junkhini joma hoy thik ase so imagine mur eta company ase and মই প্ৰিফাৰেন্স শ্বেয়াৰ হোল্ডাৰ্ছক কি কৰিম মোৰ যদি কোম্পানীটোৱে এটো ইয়াৰত প্ৰফিট আৰ্ন নকৰিলে ঠিক আছে মইতো মোৰ প্ৰিফাৰেন্স শ্বেয়াৰ হোল্ডাৰ্ছক পে কৰিব নোৱাৰিম সো সেই এমাউন্টটো যোনটো মই পে কৰিব পাৰা নাই হেতু জমা হৈ নেক্সট ইয়াৰলৈ ট্ৰান্সফাৰ হৈ যাব ঠিক আছে বা টেকেন ওভাৰ হৈ যাব সো হেতু cumulative shareholders preference shareholders at the end of the year jetia profit earn koribo company ei gutte joma hua profit khini last lump sum ekeloge pai jabo preference shareholders cumulative non cumulative preference shareholders on the other hand at the end of the year jodi eta company profit earn nai kora hihotor profit mane hihotor share of amount to hihote napai ঠিক আছে ভাবিলো আজি যদি মোৰ at the end of the year company এটা profit earn নকৰিলে non cumulative preference shareholders হিহতৰ শেয়াৰটো নাপাব they only get their shares when the company earns a profit okay participating preference shareholders মানে participating preference shareholders কিছুমান specific part of the company participate কৰিব পাৰিব বা অংশগ্ৰহণ কৰিব পাৰিব non participating preference shareholders মানে হিহতে কোম্পানীৰ যিকোনো কামত পাৰ্টিসিপেট কৰিব নোৱাৰে ঠিক আছে convertible preference shareholders বা non convertible preference shares কি হয় প্ৰিফাৰেন্স শ্বেয়াৰ যোনবোৰ আমি কনভাৰ্ট কৰিব পাৰো বা চেঞ্জ কৰিব পাৰো টু ইকুইটি শ্বেয়াৰ্স হেবোৰক কোৱা হয় কনভাৰ্টেবল প্ৰিফাৰেন্স শ্বেয়াৰ্স এণ্ড নন কনভাৰ্টেবল প্ৰিফাৰেন্স শ্বেয়াৰ্স মানে যোনবোৰক আমি ইকুইটি শ্বেয়াৰ্সত কনভাৰ্ট কৰিব নোৱাৰো Last up, we have redeemable and irredeemable preference shares. Redeemable preference shares mane along the lifetime of a company বা lifespan of a company যোনটো preference share আমি pay কৰি দিব পাৰো ঠিক আছে হেতুক কয় redeemable বা payable preference shares. Irredeemable preference shares mane lifespan of a company আমি হেবোৰ preference shares pay কৰিব নোৱাৰো Moving on to subdivisions of share capital. এবাৰৰ এক্সামৰ কাৰণে এটো এটা বহুত important topic হয় and there are high chances কি এটো এক্সামত আহিব। Share capital আমি 6 types of divide কৰিব পাৰো authorized বা registered share capital, issued share capital, subscribed capital, called up, paid up capital and reserve capital. Authorized capital বা registered capital মানে আমি যোনটো amount memorandum of association ত দিও কি স্পেসিফাই কৰি দিও কি আমাৰ কোম্পানীত ইখিনি amount আমি register কৰি আছো ঠিক আছে এই amount টো আমি চেঞ্জ কৰিব নোৱাৰো ঠিক আছে চেঞ্জ কৰিব হলে বহুত legal formalities আছে but in general course of the business আমি এটো চেঞ্জ কৰিব নোৱাৰো because this amount is mentioned in the memorandum of association ঠিক আছে Next up, we have the issued share capital. The part of the authorized share capital junto ami public of due ba public of issue koro is known as the issued share capital. Then we have subscribed share capital. Junkhini amount ami public of issue korisu tar pora junkhini public e subscribe korise hetuk ami kom subscribed share capital. Then we have called up share capital. Called up share capital mane public e subscribe kora capital or pra junkhini amount ami public or pra khuji loisu ba call korisu ba demand korisu hetu called up share capital. Then we have paid up share capital. The part of called up share capital juntu public e amak pay korise ami yar agot ki korisilu public or pra khuji loisilu etia demand korisilu Hey, demander pra public amak actually jikhini pay kore that is the paid up share capital. Reserve capital at last. Reserve capital mane the part of the capital juntuk ami thoi diu reserve kori thau ba bosai thau ba store kori thau hetuk koy reserve capital hetuk ami company future uses or karone store kori thoi diu okay then lastly we have preliminary expense preliminary mane company যেতিয়া এটা ফর্ম হয় হেতু ফর্ম হওয়ার আগত যোনখিনি আমাৰ এক্সপেন্স থাকে বা খরচা থাকে হিখিনিক আমি প্রিলিমিনারি এক্সপেন্স বুলি কও some of the points যোনটো আমি প্রিলিমিনারি এক্সপেন্সত কভার কৰো that is advertisement company এটা ফর্ম হওঁতে আমি কোম্পানিটোৰ বিষয়ে advertisement কৰিব লাগিব public should know about the company হয়নে company এটা ফর্ম হলে যদি publicে না জানে কেনেকে কোম্পানিটো গ্রো হ'ব it won't grow so company eta formation or logot jikhini expense related ase everything falls under preliminary expense aru bahut ta expense ase that falls under this category hetu bibidam sir bookot properly mentioned ase hetu tumaloke sai loba some of these are advertisement promotion foundation expense and legal expense okay so etu eta bostu tumaloke sai loba ki calls in arrear or interest kiman hoy percentage to 10% and calls in advance or interest or percentage hoy 12% etu one markers or ahibo pare important hoy okay next we have issue of shares or methods etu ami sobe jano ami journal entries pass korisu ki ami shares parot issue koribo paru premium ot koribo paru and discount ot koribo paru but under the companies act 2013 section 53 allow nokore ki ami normal equity shares discounted issue korim we can only issue sweat equity shares at a discount etia sweat equity shares mane enukwa equity shares juntu company employees of dia hoy as a consideration for the contributions that they have done for the company mane company karone ji korise employers e hetur karone hetur against বা হেতুৰ compensation হিসাবে sweat equity issue কৰা হয় for the employees at a discount Okay, so these are some of the important questions into chapter opera. First up, we have what is reserve capital, then what is capital reserve. A dutar difference to must hoy exam ot kutibo pare etu saba bhalke. Then we have what do you mean by shares. Define company and mention its features. My features kini already tumalukok bujaisu, and I would suggest you personally ki definition of company tumaluke laws into definition ase one liner definition to hetu nidiba. Moi janeke bujaisu ki a company is an artificial person jar separate legal entity junto separate legal entity hoy perpetual succession ase tare shares transferable hoy owned by directed by heneke definition to milai pine likhiba. Okay, don't go for the one liner definition. Next up, we have define preliminary expense and give examples. মই আগতো কৈছো বিবিদাম সৰৰ বুকত বহুত ভালকে পইণ্টছ বোৰ দিয়া আছে কি preliminary expenseৰ আন্ডাৰত কি কভাৰ হয় ভালকে হেতু চাবা. Then what do you mean by minimum subscription, equity shares and preference shares, and make sure তোমালোকে equity share and preference share difference to চাই আছা হেতু আহে. Okay, then we have oversubscription and undersubscription, and lastly we have authorized capital বা registered capital or meaning to মই তোমালোকক এটো বুজাইছো. Then we have uses of security premium reserve, এটো ভালকে চাবা. This is also very important. In the next slide, মই তোমালোকক financial statements or কিছুমান important questions mention কৰি দিম. হেতু chapterত explain কৰিবলগীয়া ইমান একো নাই, so মই directly তোমালোকক questions provide কৰিম, হেতু চাই লবা. Statement of financial accounts or pra ikhini questions ma tumalokok shortlist kori disu, ikhini bhalke sai jaba. State two examples of current liability, non-current liability, current assets and non-current assets. Next, what do you mean by contingent liabilities? Mention the items under contingent liabilities, etu bhalke saba. What do you mean by reserve and surplus? And mention the items under reserve and surplus. Then we have major heads of asset and liability in a company balance sheet. Eto bhalke saba, okay? Then we have mentioned the subheadings of shareholders fund. And lastly, we have mentioned the characteristics and limitations of financial statements. Year under limitations to basi bhalke saba, karon limitations to khudar basi chances thake. And etu chapter into most important bostu hoy hetu hol balance sheet or format. Etu 100% ebar exam paper at ahar chances ase for 5 marks. Make sure that you don't miss the format of the balance sheet. So that's all for today's video. Jodi video to bhal lagise, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel Adhyana Tutorials, and do follow us on Instagram as well as on Facebook. This is your tutor signing off. Thank you.